In the late autumn of 207 BC, the wind sweeping across the Guanzhong plain already carried a bone-chilling cold. An army, fresh from a brutal battle, marched through the blood-soaked fields of Lantian. Amidst cries of, "We've reached Xianyang," they finally advanced to the southern bank of the Wei River. Their leader was a man named Liu Bang. At this moment, as he reined in his warhorse and gazed at the mountain-like palace complex on the opposite bank, his memory might have flashed back to an afternoon many years ago. Back then, he was just a lowly patrol chief, escorting a group of conscripts to this very city. Standing on his toes in the crowded streets, he watched the majestic procession of the first emperor of Qin and uttered a sigh that would be recorded in the annals of history. Ah, this is what it means to be a true man. That was his first taste of the thirst for power and his first feeling of awe for this city. However, now standing here again, forged into a military leader by fire and blood, he noticed a fact that his younger self had completely overlooked. This city, the largest and most luxurious on Earth at the time, was naked. It had no defensive walls. In the logic of Chinese civilization, the character for city, Cheng, also means wall. No wall, no city. For any ruler, the city wall was the line between civilization and barbarism, the last shield for survival. This was especially true for the Qin, a dynasty famous for building the Great Wall. For their own capital to be without walls was like an oyster stripped of its hard shell, exposing its rich, soft, treasure-laden belly to the naked blade. By the roadside outside Xianyang, the last ruler of the great Qin Empire, Xianyang, dressed in white mourning robes with a silk ribbon tied around his neck, knelt in the dust. Along with his undefended capital, he surrendered to Liu Bang. Could this be true? Had the walls simply eroded over time? Had 2 millennia of wind and sand buried the truth? To answer this question, modern archaeologists have spent 60 years. Since 1959, the shovels of the Shanxi Provincial Institute of Archaeology have carpet-bombed 72 square kilometers of the Xianyang Plateau. They discovered the superfoundation of the Epang Palace, 1,320 meters long, vast enough to serve as the base for dozens of modern football stadiums. They unearthed intricate underground water pipes, exquisite murals, and even the scorched red earth and charcoal left by the Great Fire that destroyed the city. Archaeologists could find every trace buried beneath the earth, but the one thing they could not find was a wall. Whether in the palace district or the artisan workshop area, the survey results were always the same suffocating silence. No trace of rammed earth walls, no remnant of a foundation. In the end, the academic world had to accept the unbelievable fact. The Qin capital of Xianyang truly had no outer city wall. This is the great puzzle that history has left for us. The man who exhausted his empire to build the Great Wall against the northern nomads, the emperor with such a profound sense of insecurity that he built a massive terracotta army for his own afterlife. Why would he commit such a fatal military blunder? To solve this puzzle, we must first correct a fundamental error in perspective. When we look for a city wall, our gaze is confined to the immediate vicinity of the urban ruins. But for the first emperor of Qin, his vision never stopped at the city's edge. If you could soar like an eagle to an altitude of 10,000 meters and look down upon the East Asian continent of the 3rd century BC, you would realize that Xianyang's supposed defensive vulnerability was a massive optical illusion. The first reason the emperor dared to let his capital run naked was simple, yet breathtakingly arrogant. In his mind, it was completely unnecessary. For this conqueror, his city walls were the mountain ranges, the rivers, the very spine of the earth itself. Direct your gaze to the land where Xianyang is located. This is one of the most famous geographical units in Chinese history, the Guanzhong, or the land within the passes. The name itself is military, within the mountain passes. It is a natural fortress designed by God, a vast enclosed basin. To the north lies the desolate Loess Plateau, its thousands of ravines impassable for nomadic cavalry. To the south, the towering Qinling Mountains rise like a green barrier, cutting off threats from the southern kingdoms. To the west, the continuous Longshan Mountains shield it from tribal incursions, and to the east, the roaring Yellow River, and the treacherous Xiao and Zhongtiao mountains. These four natural barriers hermetically sealed this fertile plain. This geography is what historians call the land of four fortifications. With the technology of ancient warfare, it was a super fortress, almost impossible to breach. The Qin only needed to lock down the few strategic choke points in this long defensive line. And so the famous Four Passes defense system was born. Hangu Pass to the east, Wu Pass to the south, San Pass to the west, and Xiao Pass to the north. These four passes were the four great gates of the Qin Empire. Of all these gates, the most legendary, the one that filled the eastern kingdoms with despair, was the Hangu Pass. It was not merely a pass, it was a geographical marvel and a military nightmare. It sits in the narrowest gorge between the Yellow River and the Qinling Mountains, the only major artery into the Guanzhong Plain. Sheer cliffs on both sides, a deep canyon in the middle. The histories say that here, chariots could not travel side by side, nor could horses ride abreast. In the bloody era of the warring states, the rulers of the eastern kingdoms spent countless sleepless nights because of this pass. For their soldiers, Hangu Pass was the end of the world. It was the site of countless battles where one man could hold off 10,000. It was the empire's iron gate. Once it was shut, the people of Qin within could farm their lands and forge their weapons in peace, coldly watching the world outside descend into chaos. The invincibility of Hangu Pass bred an almost superstitious sense of security in the hearts of the Qin. As long as Hangu Pass stood, Xianyang was absolutely safe. But that's not all. The first emperor's confidence came not only from the distant mountains, but from the very ground beneath his feet. In addition to the macro-level protection of the land of four fortifications, the micro-level topography of Xianyang itself was a crucial asset. If you ever have the chance to visit the archaeological site in Shanxi and stand on the ruins of the Xianyang Palace on the north bank of the Wei River, you will immediately feel a sense of topographical dominance. The main body of Xianyang was not built on the low-lying river floodplain, but on the expansive Loess Plateau on the north bank, known in antiquity as the Xianyang Plateau. This is a massive, naturally elevated highland. Surveys show that the plateau is, on average, 10 to 20 meters higher than the Wei River Valley to the south. In the age of cold weapons, this was a huge tactical advantage. Here, archaeologists discovered the remains of the #1 palace of Xianyang. It was a colossal rammed earth platform, 60 meters long, 45 meters wide, and over 6 meters high. You can imagine the great Qin Palace Hall standing on this platform, superimposed on the elevation of the plateau itself, like a lighthouse looking down on the world. This topography turned the city itself into a natural citadel. The vast plateau to the north, the wide Wei River as a natural moat to the south, and the palace complex perched high above. An enemy attacking the Xianyang Palace would not only have to cross the river, but also charge up a steep slope of more than 10 meters. It was the divinely chosen place to build a capital. In fact, if we rewind the clock another 800 years, we find that this land within the passes was the very cradle of power for the entire Chinese civilization. As early as the 11th century BC, the ancestors of the Zhou dynasty recognized the value of this land. They moved their capital here, establishing the twin cities of Feng and Hao. Why? Because they saw the geographical advantage of a land fortified by 4 barriers. It was from this strategic base that the Zhou launched their eastward campaign, overthrowing the Shang dynasty and establishing a rule that would last for 800 years. History's script is astonishingly repetitive. When the Qin were just a horse-breeding tribe on the western frontier, they dreamed of entering this land of milk and honey. The state of Qin fought long and bloody wars for this goal. Every time they moved their capital eastward, they were pushing closer to this strategic high ground. So, when we return to the perspective of the first emperor, everything makes sense. He commanded Hangu Pass, the strongest gate under heaven. He stood upon the Xianyang Plateau, a natural fortress. He was shielded by the Qinling Mountains, an impassable wall. With the 4 passes as his armor and the plateau as his shield, to then build another circle of mud walls around his own house? That would not just be redundant. For an emperor who aimed to swallow the 6 kingdoms and command the submission of the entire world, it would be an insult to his own imperial power, a self-denial of the strategic myth that was his 1,000-mile golden city. If the geographical barriers made the first emperor feel that a city wall was unnecessary, then when we focus on the very fabric of Xianyang itself, we discover an even more shocking fact. Even if the first emperor had wanted to build a wall, in terms of engineering and urban planning, it was almost impossible. Follow my description and turn your gaze to the north bank of the Wei River. This was the political core of the Qin capital. On this vast Loess plateau, archaeologists have unearthed the ruins of 3 massive palace complexes. These huge architectural marvels were not clustered together like the Forbidden City in Beijing. They were scattered. The archaeological reports show that the districts of Qin Xianyang, palace, workshop, and residential, were not clearly demarcated and tightly integrated. Instead, they formed a widely dispersed, locally clustered, nebula-like distribution. The entire area of the Xianyang ruins spans a staggering 72 square kilometers. By comparison, the city of Rome in 200 BC was still a compact city huddled behind the Servian wall, with an area of about 3 square kilometers. And this was just the core area. The historical records tell a famous story. Every time Qin conquered a rival state, it would make a replica of its palace on the north bank of Xianyang. Every time the first emperor destroyed a kingdom, he would not only seize its land but also copy its palace and paste it into his own capital. A whole string of over 140 palaces in the styles of the conquered kingdoms was lined up along the high ground of the Wei River's north bank, stretching eastward for miles. It was an unprecedented World's Fair of architecture. Imagine the scene. As you travel along the Wei River, you would see the architectural styles of all the fallen kingdoms interwoven in a bizarre and magnificent tapestry. These palaces were connected by elevated walkways and covered corridors, and within this giant complex were housed the tens of thousands of beautiful women and musical instruments plundered from the 6 states. The city had become a museum of war trophies. It was no longer a static settlement. It was a dynamic, living organism that grew with the progress of the war. Wherever the iron hooves of the Qin army reached, the boundary of Xianyang extended. With every step the empire advanced, the city grew an inch eastward. Now, put yourself back in the shoes of a city wall designer. How would you build a wall for a city like this? To enclose this sprawling chain of palaces, you would need to build a wall of absurd length. The engineering effort would be astronomical, perhaps even surpassing the difficulty of building the Great Wall. In terms of urban planning science, it was completely unfeasible. A traditional city wall is, in essence, a container. It presupposes that the city is of a finite size with a clear boundary, but the core logic of Xianyang was expansion, an outward explosion of energy. And yet this was only the story of the North Bank. If you think this was the full extent of the first emperor's madness, you still underestimate him, because his gaze had already crossed the wide Wei River to the south bank. There, in a place where even the foundations were not yet fully laid, an even more breathtaking, even more unconventional plan was brewing. And that was the ultimate reason that made all city walls seem utterly redundant. If the endless chain of palaces on the north bank of the Wei River showcased the first emperor's ambition to conquer the geographical world, then when we cross that wide river to the south bank, what we see is his ambition to conquer the cosmos. This is also the ultimate reason why Xianyang could never have a city wall. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the night sky over the Guanzhong Plain 2,000 years ago. When you look up, you see the brilliant Milky Way stretching across the heavens. At the northern celestial pole lies the purple Forbidden Enclosure, the symbolic residence of the celestial emperor, marked by the unwavering North Star. On the opposite side of the Milky Way lies the Yingxi asterism, symbolizing the celestial emperor's detached palaces. And connecting these two is the Geddo star bridge, the constellation Cassiopeia. This was not just astronomy. This was the sacred star map of power in ancient China. And the first emperor of Qin wanted to copy this star map directly onto the surface of the Earth. This was the famous concept of Fa Tianxiangdi, modeling heaven and earth. In his grand design, the Wei River that flowed through the Guanzhong Plain was not just a river, it was the earthly projection of the celestial Milky Way. The Xianyang Palace, high on the north bank, was the earthly counterpart of the celestial Purple Palace. It stood above all, the unmoving center of the universe, just like the North Star. And the vast plains on the south bank corresponded to the celestial Yingxi asterism. To connect this man-made heaven and earth, the first emperor built a great bridge across the Wei River. The histories record that this bridge was named Gedao, the Gallery Way, just like the Celestial Star Bridge. It sacredly crossed the mortal Milky Way, uniting the north and south banks into a single cosmic whole. This was the true face of Qin's Xianyang. It was not a city in the secular sense. It was a giant, open-air religious theater. It was the first emperor's altar, used to communicate with, and perhaps even to replace, heaven itself. If you were to build a wall on the north bank and another on the south, you would not just be cutting off urban traffic. You would be physically severing the sacred connection between the Purple Palace and Yingxi. You would be cutting the flow of Xi, the cosmic energy that ran through heaven and earth. For an emperor obsessed with feng shui, the quest for immortality, and his own divinity, severing this celestial vein was more unacceptable than a military defeat. He needed this open, flowing layout to allow his imperial power to radiate, like starlight, unimpeded to every corner of the empire. The ultimate expression of this cosmic vision was that monster of architectural history, the Epang Palace, Epang Gong. We cannot talk about Xianyang's lack of walls without confronting this behemoth on the south bank of the Wei River. The poet Du Mu later wrote, "It covered more than 100 square miles, blotting out the sky." Literature may exaggerate, but the archaeologist's shovel tells a story that may be even more terrifying. South of the river, the archaeological team discovered a staggering rammed earth platform. It was 1,320 meters long and 420 meters wide. What does that mean? The foundation of this single building covered 0.55 square kilometers. That is equivalent to 2/3 of the total area of the entire Forbidden City. And remember, this was not a palace complex. This was merely the front hall of the Epang Palace, the main hall for court assemblies, a space so vast it could not only hold 10,000 men below, but also fly banners 5 stories high. This had surpassed the category of palace. In the West, the Colosseum of Rome and the Acropolis of Athens would look like delicate, miniature building blocks next to this oriental monster. This was not a building. It was a city within a city. And this, precisely, created another physical dead end for building a city wall. Imagine you are a Qin general in charge of city defense. The emperor orders the construction of such a super project on the south bank. Hundreds of thousands of convicts and artisans, along with a flood of stone and timber, pour into the area. The construction site expands outward daily. Today's boundary is tomorrow's new foundation pile. Where would you build the wall? To make matters worse, the project was never finished. This is a truth that has been misunderstood for 2,000 years. When archaeologists excavated the Epang Palace site, they were astonished to find very few roof tiles. More importantly, they found no evidence of a large-scale layer of red burnt earth, a stark contrast to the thick, fire-scarred layers at the Xianyang Palace site on the north bank. What does this mean? It means that when Liu Bang and Xiang Yu arrived, the Epang Palace was still a giant, exposed, half-finished product. Its rammed earth foundation may have just been completed. The massive wooden pillars might have just been erected. The walls were only half built. That magnificent roof had not even been put on. It was not a glittering palace. It was a dusty, sprawling super-construction site. For a beast that was growing so frantically and was not yet fully formed, you simply could not tailor a suit of armor for it. The speed of any wall construction could never keep up with the first emperor's inflated desire. So history's conclusion is brutal. Xianyang had no wall, not because the first emperor forgot, but because he couldn't stop. His empire was running too fast. His dreams were expanding too fast. His city's boundaries were growing too fast. This speed and scale completely overwhelmed the limits of his society's resources, and the physical limits of urban planning. The city was in a perpetual state of unfinished euphoria. It was like an overgrown giant, its bones growing wildly, its muscles bulging, but its skin, the city wall, could never catch up. It remained exposed, and with its nakedness, it displayed to the world the most extreme confidence and the most extreme vulnerability of its era. This vulnerability was usually concealed by the majesty of the unified empire. No one dared to question if the emperor's dream was too big, until the year 209 BC, when a peasant named Chen Sheng shouted a rebellious slogan in a marsh. When a rebel general named Zhou Wen, with an army of hundreds of thousands, suddenly broke through the impregnable Hangu Pass. As the alarms of war sounded for the first time on the Guanzhong plain, the second emperor, Hu Hai, looked out of his window in terror. He saw no sturdy walls, no fortified gates. He saw only the treasure-filled palaces on the north bank, and on the south, the giant, silent, unfinished foundation of a failed project. In that moment, the so-called modeling heaven and earth, the so-called center of the universe, instantly collapsed into the most terrible of jokes. There was no wall. There was truly no wall. There was only the endless open country and the coming fire. In the winter of 207 BC, the heavy gates of Xianyang Palace finally opened to a conqueror. When Liu Bang walked into the main hall, the very symbol of supreme power, this peasant rebel leader was instantly struck by a suffocating opulence. Here were piled all the rare treasures plundered from the 6 conquered states. In the rear palaces lived thousands of beautiful women taken from their fallen kingdoms. For a man who had lived on the edge of a blade, this was a giant, gentle trap. The histories record that Liu Bang, upon seeing the palaces, the tapestries, the treasures, and the thousands of women, had the intention to stay and reside there. He wanted to stay. He wanted to enjoy the taste of his spoils in this exquisite, unwalled cage. But on that critical night, his strategist Zhang Liang and his fierce general Fan Kuai threw a bucket of cold water on him. They pointed out the fatal nature of this city with piercing clarity. This is not a home. This is a tomb. This open, unwalled metropolis was designed for the supremely confident first emperor. It was built for attack, for radiating power, but it was absolutely not built for defense. If he were to indulge in the palace now, when Shang Yu's army of 400,000 arrived, Liu Bang, trapped in this defenseless palace, would become a roasted duck on a magnificent platter. Liu Bang understood. He made the decision that would ultimately win him the empire. He sealed the treasuries and returned his army to his camp. He did not take a single thing. He put seals on all the palace gates, then swiftly withdrew his army from this undefended center, retreating to the safety of his geographically advantageous encampment. He had just left when black banners rose on the horizon. They had come. Shang Yu, the god of war from the state of Chu, with a coalition army of 400,000, surged into the Guanzhong plain like a black tide. Unlike Liu Bang's political calculations, Shang Yu brought pure, primal destruction. For Shang Yu, the city before him was not just the enemy's capital. The endless replicas of the 6 kingdoms' palaces were the symbol of his homeland's humiliation. The towering Xianyang palace was the symbol of tyranny, and the open, unwalled layout was not confidence in his eyes, but a sickening arrogance. In the first month of 206 BC, a cataclysm descended. The records of the grand historian use just a few words to record the end. He sacked Xianyang, killed the surrendered Qin prince Ziying, and burned the Qin palaces. With no walls to stop them, the Chu cavalry flooded every street, every palace, like a torrent from a broken dam. It was a one-sided slaughter. And then a fire was lit. The histories say, the fire burned for 3 months without extinguishing. For 3 whole months, the night sky of the Guanzhong plain was painted red. The celestial towers that modeled heaven and earth, the flying bridges that crossed the Milky Way, the center of the cosmic order, all turned to ash in a crackling inferno. And with the fire, vanished the irreplaceable original copies of the 100 schools of thought, collected by the first emperor in the Imperial library. The city that had tried to have no boundaries, that had tried to embrace the universe finally returned to dust in the most brutal way possible. After the fire was extinguished, Xianyang was a ruin so total that the eventual victor, Liu Bang, when founding his Han dynasty, looked upon the devastation and made a helpless but wise choice. Abandon Xianyang. He did not rebuild his capital on the ruins of the Qin. He crossed the Wei River and started anew to the southeast of Xianyang. This new city was given a new, resounding name, Chang'an, perpetual peace. And if you look at the ruins of Han Chang'an, you will find a striking change, as if they had learned a bloody lesson from the fall of the Qin. The rulers of the Han dynasty, almost in a vengeful frenzy, built massive city walls. According to archaeological reconstructions, the walls of Han Chang'an were 8 to 10 meters high and 12 to 16 meters thick, as solid as metal. The romantic and arrogant era of taking heaven and earth as the city wall was over. Xianyang became the only unwalled capital of a unified dynasty in all of Chinese history. A full 1,000 years later, the poet Du Mu, in his famous Rhapsody on the Epang Palace, would write of Xianyang's vanished splendor. Let us, accompanied by the music, recite a passage from his work and look back upon this unbelievable chapter of history.
六王毕，四海一，蜀山突，阿房出。复要300余里，隔离天日。离山北沟而西则直走咸阳，2川溶溶，流入宫墙，5步一楼，10步一阁。囊腰漫回，岩崖高卓，各抱地势，勾心斗角。盘盘烟，群群烟，风房水卧，处不知其几千万落。长桥卧波，未云何龙？复道行空，不计何鸿？高低明夷，不知西东。歌台鸾响，春光融融。五殿猛秀，风雨凄凄。一日之内，一宫之间，而气候不齐。妃嫔迎枪，王子皇孙辞楼下殿，敛来于情。朝歌夜谐，为情宫人。明星盈盈，开庄镜也；日云扰扰，说笑还也。未留掌力，弃之水也。烟霞雾横，焚焦燃也；雷霆乍惊，公车过也。如如远听，遥不知其所之也。一极一容，尽慨极言，漫意远视，而忘信焉。有不得见者36年。燕赵之收藏，韩魏之经营，齐楚之精英，几世纪连，剽列其恩，一叠如山。一旦不能有，殊来其见。鼎当一时，金块珠砾，弃之离夷。情人视之，亦不胜惜。嗟乎！一人之心，千万人之心也。情爱分舍，人亦恋其家，奈何取之见之处，用之如离沙。使负动之处多于栏亩之农夫，架梁之船多于机上之工蚁，丁口零零多于载鱼之属吏，瓦缝参差多于招生之薄履历，直栏横介多于酒土之陈歌，冠弦欧雅多于世人之言语。使天下之人不敢言而敢怒，独夫之心日以骄固。数举教，函谷举，楚人一句，可怜交通。呜呼！灭六国者，六国也，非秦也；诛秦者，秦也，非天下也。嗟乎！ 是六国各爱其人者，足以具秦。是秦复爱六国之人者，第三世，可知万事而为之，虽得而诛灭也。秦人不暇之爱，而后人哀之；后人哀之而不见之，亦使后人而复哀后人也。